if I were a blockchain network, uh, I can either be pre-launch or post-launch. And pre-launch, there can be multiple phases. I could be having a test net. I could have a beta net, an alpha net, a main net. What would a process look like from a timeline and integration standpoint to have my blockchain network's data exposed through Lunie, and I can send people to Lunie in order to participate in securing my network?
Sure. So it really depends on a couple. There's a few important factors. One is like the underlying data model, the framework that was used to build the blockchain. So because we already have some Cosmos integrations and we're very familiar with the technology, if you're a Cosmos SDK blockchain, um, it can be a few days of work for us to to basically, once we secure an endpoint for the data, like from a node that's running, yeah, it's a few days to get everything to our standard. We basically, our API will query the node, all the endpoints we need, transform the data the way that we like to show it in the front end, on the web and in mobile, and then that's it. We work on some announcements and try and get people to use it. For networks with totally different data models, or like unique layer one networks, I would call them. Depending on how good the documentation is and what the existing infrastructure is like, it can take a little bit more time, but it's a few weeks. And of course, it depends on things like we're announcing the Kusama integration very soon. We've been working on that for a while. A lot of I'll give you an example. A lot of the validators in Kusama, they don't have names, like human readable names or images yet. So we have to make decisions about our user experience. Like, what do we do? Like, if you look at the validator list, if you're a potential staker on Kusama and you look at the validator list and it's all, hashes and, non-human readable information, is, what are we going to do about that? So things like that pop up occasionally when we're looking at new networks, like what are the optimizations we need to make that, we didn't account for because this is a new set of APIs and new data model. With the Kusama integration, like it takes about a minute right now to query rewards.
Okay.
Like reward data for the end user. So we've been developing a system to make this take a second or less instead. So those kinds of things are harder to predict, but yeah, it takes a couple of weeks to get a stable integration done. And there's a few milestones, just a few like levels of integration. The first level is just showing data, as you said. So we can do that relatively quickly. The second level is an integration with the address management features and transactions. So like signing, creating an address, recovering an address, signing transactions or messages. And we do that on mobile and in the extension. So that takes a bit more time. It's a bit more involved. You have to understand, another set of libraries, basically. And then the third milestone or deliverable for us usually is a hardware integration. And, that's a whole nother set of libraries and things to overcome, user experience challenges. And that's assuming, in the case of Ledger, like the Ledger app's already available on the Ledger Live store. It's usually in the Ledger Live app. It's usually not. And so, those are the things we think about. And yeah, so we're looking from a few days to a few weeks, depending on the complexity of the integration.
And so I'm guessing from the Lunie side, the architecture is designed in a way where you can plug in these different networks and you provide a unified interface to your end users, because it doesn't make sense. It would be very jarring if every network had a completely different view, right? So more or less, of course, there are going to be nuances. So what if a particular network doesn't have the data in a format, or you're not able to query the data in a format that fits into your model? Like, what has that ever happened so far? would that blow up your realistic timelines? Like, can you give an example of a network that has happened?
No, it's a pretty flexible system we have. So if data doesn't exist, for example, like some of the networks that we have or that we're looking at don't have governance yet. That's fine. We just we don't try to integrate the governance features if it's not there. Yeah, in the case of Kusama, as I was saying, like there isn't the kind of simple rewards endpoint that we might get from Cosmos SDK, which to us is critical information. Like the user comes every time a user comes to check their portfolio, they want to see how many rewards they've earned. So the performance on that endpoint. Now, granted, Kusama's a testnet and kind of and they're in rapid development. They're updating the API really often, so this could change. But right now, it takes like a minute to query the rewards because it has to go back through all the eras and do this rewards calculation. That's not really acceptable in a user-facing product. So we designed a system that would kind of scrape this data in advance and then be able to serve it upon request instead of letting the node do the processing for us, basically. That's an example. Time that we didn't expect to be spending on something we took for granted, that there would be a nice clean endpoint for rewards data. That's okay. These are all like interesting engineering problems, and we have a great engineering team, so they tend to figure it out.
Yeah. When is too early? If I had a white paper that I wrote, maybe I outsource it, but I have a white paper. I come to Lunie and say, hey, I want an integration. That's obviously too early. But along the spectrum,
maybe not. Maybe we should put a PDF viewer as for a white paper project.
That's a great idea.
Nice
Actually,
idea,
this just came to my mind. But if you provided an SDK, a Lunie SDK, that a network has to adapt to, I think that would help educate the newer networks in how, just from your experience, because you've integrated with all of these networks, and this is the minimum bar. And so just like how you have your tiers of integration, you can have tiers of SDK levels or whatever you want in terms of the granularity. And so the blockchain network can expose an endpoint to fit that level. For example, having human-friendly names for validators.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a feature, maybe that's not a feature, but that would be one of the checkpoints on that list.
Yeah. We get a lot of questions about that. And I've started writing a post actually, more around like what's important to bootstrap a proof of stake community. But I think on the technical side, there are a number of things that will make the end user experience just so much easier and so much smoother for anybody who's implementing any UI.